Psst. Hey, would you do me a favor? Grab your phone or smart device and open up that camera. Then point it right here at the QR code. Do you have it? I'll wait a second. When you see the link pop up on your screen, give it a tap. You ready? Boom! Welcome to the Hillsborough County official YouTube channel. We've got all sorts of videos here, all about what makes our community such an awesome place. From local events and community highlights to what's in the perfect Cuban sandwich. We've got it all. We're always adding new things, so while you're here, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you'll never miss a new video. Here's that QR code again, just in case you missed it. Go ahead and check it out. Ooh. This must have fallen out of that video. This really is the perfect Cuban sandwich.
Tampa Bay is like no place else.
Wait, you can't recycle the bag? You have to throw it away.
Proper recycling keeps it that way for everyone. Bags tangle in machinery and can bring sorting efforts to a halt.
No bags.
Trash the bags and keep our recycling program moving forward.
No, Mom, look, no plastic bags.
Do your part to keep our recycling bag-free. Trash the tanglers or return them to participating retailers. For more information, visit tampabayrecycles.org.
These are the jobs you may not see every day, but just know we're working hard to make Hillsborough County a better place to live, work, and play. Subscribe to our YouTube page for more great county-related videos, only on HTV.
Flossing in the morning is a really great way to keep your teeth healthy and start the day. But when you're through, here's what you do. Throw it in the trash, don't flush it. There's a problem lots of people don't know, called sanitary sewer overflow. A condition buried deep in the ground, inside a pipe where bad clogs are found. It's a problem we can all help solve, so throw it in the trash, don't flush it. Baby wipes, bandages, cotton pads, paper towels, dental floss, clog up bad. Medicines, kitty litter, cotton swabs, hair, throw them in the trash, don't flush it. It just takes a second to do the right thing, so toss it and let's keep our pipes clean. Throw it in the trash, don't flush it. If it's not toilet paper, don't flush it. Even if it says you can, don't flush it. If you're having any doubts, don't flush it. One more time, don't flush it.
20 seconds is all it takes for a toddler to drown. In less time than it takes to post on social media or change the laundry, a child can slip out a door and silently drown. Nearly all the children who drowned last year in the Tampa Bay area were last seen inside their home. Visit PreventNeedlessDeaths.com right now to learn more about simple steps you can take today to save a child's life.
Oh man, here comes Arnie again. Check this out.
What's up, Arnie? What are you doing? You made a mess in my hallway.
Hey, Arnie. Looks like you could use a hand. Let me help you.
You don't need superpowers to be a hero. Help make Hillsborough bully-free.
Hey everyone!
Good morning and welcome to Hillsborough Transportation Planning Organization meeting. I'm going to have a roll call first. I'm sorry, call to order. Let us stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Roll call, Gail, please.
Commissioner Myers?
Here.
Mayor Ross?
Here.
Commissioner Owen?
Here.
Commissioner Wastel? Here. Commissioner Cohen?
Here.
Commissioner Kemp? Here. Councilmember Clendenin?
Here.
Councilmember Hurtak?
Here.
Councilmember Maniscalco?
Here.
Mayor Kilton?
Here.
School Board Member Vaughn? Charles Klug?
Here.
Joe Lopano?
Here.
Greg Slater?
Here.
Justin Willits?
Here.
Planning Commissioner Joseph?
Here.
We do have an in-person quorum.
Thank you. We have no public comments, so we move right into our action items. Laura Brooks, good morning. Lauren Brooks.
She's not online.
We're expecting her online, but I can go ahead and give the presentation in that case.
Thank
Wade
you.
Reynolds, Hillsborough TPO.
Excuse me, we're getting an echo, staff.
Okay. This is the Hillsborough County Truck Route Plan Update and 2050 Long Range Transportation Plan Freight and Goods Movement Needs Assessments. Oh. Well, is it? Oh, there we go. Thank you. No, it's a PDF. Thank you. So I can. Oh, thanks. All right. Brief overview. I'll just go through some objectives, the analysis and findings, the projects, costs and investment levels, and then the cost-benefit analysis and recommended action. The objectives and setup. Why assess the truck routes and freight? Well, we have freight delivery systems and truck routes, which are the arteries of that system. There are two different plans here, the truck route plan update. This is updating the 2014 plan for unincorporated county, addressing network deficiencies and issues, managing truck flow in Hillsborough County, and for the freight needs assessment, identifying other needs, bottlenecks, or hotspot locations. The main focus is the roads supporting the truck routes there. Propose changes to existing projects or identify new projects as part of that assessment. Overall, we'll be looking to integrate the neighborhood context, reduce environmental impacts, preserve quality of life goals, and improve roadway safety and integrate Vision Zero initiatives. So first, we have the Hillsborough County truck routes, and then Hillsborough County owned or maintained roads and other roads which are non-truck routes. We excluded limited access facilities like that, such as the interstates, because those would heavily skew the volumes observed in the other roadways. So, a quick definition of a truck. The grayed out ones would not be included as a truck. Class 6 and above, basically 3-axle single unit and higher, is what is defined as a truck under this plan. The inputs, we did a number of freight stakeholder interviews. We met with the jurisdictions as well as with the sheriff, the planning commission, Mosaic Fertilizer, and other operators. We also had a community survey with over 700 participants. We looked to prioritize the routing issues with the greatest impact. Safety, traffic congestion, road damage, and noise were the highest scoring of those. We also found truck-related issue locations. We had a map where people could place pins and describe their issues. So that combined with 2 years of data from Hillsborough County's complaint or issue resolution system, we were able to map those and get a really great data set of ongoing issues. The roads with the most complaints, you may not be surprised, Lithia Pinecrest Road, Gun Highway, and US 301. Looking at those truck route volumes, the map on the left is the replica origin destination volume data. The larger the line, the larger the volume. The middle map is freight activity centers. And then the right map is the context classification. The city of Tampa does theirs by land use, while the county does theirs by roadway type. We use the county's roadway classification as part of the truck route plan update. So we organize the data into two categories: existing freight network factors and freight-related performance factors. And we establish 3 sets of criteria: truck route evaluation criteria, freight network evaluation criteria, and project impact evaluation criteria. So there are a number of factors that we went into here: corridor designations, the truck volume, the roadway character, such as if it is designated a freight activity center, the speed, the functional classification, and the roadway context class. We also looked at detractors, such as areas of concern and sensitive features, so parks, schools, non-discrimination plan areas, and the number of complaints associated, as well as survey comments associated with those areas. We also looked at restrictions: no truck route signs, for example, number of road lanes, and pavement condition, as well as bridge weight and height limitations. The evaluation criteria, we looked at routes that are to be preserved and those that are underperforming that might be looked at for either improvement or for undesignation. The applicable road networks were Hillsborough County owned and maintained roads for the truck route plan, and then other roads as well. Project impact evaluation criteria, we looked at how each proposed project will mitigate hindrances to efficient freight performance. So again, that's on the truck routes and Hillsborough County owned and maintained roads. So this is just a map of the roadways analyzed. The purple roads here are Hillsborough County owned and maintained roads that are not currently truck routes. The red lines would be the truck routes, and then the green lines are some other roads that were analyzed for their performance, notably State Road 39 in Plant City. So freight attractors, we scored them just in a 0 to 3 category, as well as freight detractors. The detractors would be unfavorable conditions for that traffic. And the attractors would be, do those conditions support better truck flow? So the findings, the lower performing routes, those are mostly in areas with few freight detractors, most of those segments. We evaluated the effectiveness of County Road 672 and Sims Road as truck routes. Those have some sensitive features, and we received a lot of comments on them. On the south end of Dale Mabry Highway at Interbay Boulevard, they were very low performing, but they provide critical access to MacDill Air Force Base and the fuel terminal at Old Port Tampa. And we also looked at the routes downtown, which are lower performing, particularly as the character downtown has changed from a lot of industrial users and warehouse users to more office and other users. So on the county roads, there are some changes proposed. These would be to add George Bean Parkway, West Shore Interchange ramps, and the Veterans Expressway Courtney Campbell Causeway ramp to the truck route network. Those have seen some changes since the route was last updated and were not included as previously in that plan. Also adding Air Cargo Road to the truck route network. It is a through route around the airport and is set up for those activities. And exploring opportunities to expand the truck route network in areas of Plant City where there are high freight activities, Northwest County and South County where those truck routes are more than 1 mile apart and they're really onto one route but serve a very large area. In other roads, adding the I-4 connector, which has been built since this plan was in place. Also the downtown interstate ramps, frontage roads, and the I-75 rest area to the truck route network. We are going to coordinate with agency partners to reconcile any designation differences. We had a couple of roads in the city of Tampa that we were referencing because it was an old map, and we have gone through those and updated to make sure we have the city's roads properly designated, and exploring opportunities to expand the truck route network in Plant City and provide redundant and additional access to those freight hubs. So looking at the needs assessment, the projects and their costs, we reviewed the plans of the jurisdictions and recently completed projects. And we looked at those into a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 investment level, as well as the baseline investment level. Most of those cost levels, we did projects under $2,000 and then those that exceed $2 million. The I-275 widenings, interchange improvements, and the Gandy Bridge replacement would be an example of the higher investment projects. So looking at the project impacts on truck operations, those evaluation criteria were road criticality, truck-related fatal or serious crashes, volume to capacity ratio, survey comments and complaints, and freight stakeholder comments, and does that project improve safety or reduce truck-related crashes and reduce delay. The impact to cost ratio, we looked at those ones that have a high impact and hopefully a lower cost, but you can see that this matrix shows how those were evaluated. So with that, we do recommend that the TPO board receive the 2050 LRTP needs assessment for freight and goods movement and the Hillsborough County truck route plan update for approval. The truck route plan will further go to the Board of County Commissioners for an updated ordinance, while the 2050 LRTP needs assessment will go into the development of the cost feasible plan. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Maniscalco.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to see Air Cargo Road included in this because it's one of those underutilized roads, not to give away a secret, but it was a major investment when they redid it, and it connects Dale Mabry via Tampa Bay, Martin Luther King, to Anderson Road, Hillsborough, and it bypasses, it helps ease congestion. So when you have trucks going through there, you know, because Dale Mabry can be a nightmare. And Hillsborough Avenue, you know, there's a lot of action there. So this is, you know, another access point that I think would help at least that Drew Park corridor and that section, you know, south of Hillsborough, north of Tampa Bay and whatnot. So very good. Thanks.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Board Member Clue.
Yes. Back in 2017 or so, we were able to get funding and dredge a Big Bend Channel down the south. And that's Big Bend leads to the Big Bend power plant and Mosaics down there. But the port also has Port Red Wing, and we only had one user, I think probably at that time, and now it's filled up. We have a number of users out there. They're bringing in aggregate and cementitious materials. Ardent Mills, ConAgra used to be downtown. That's down there now. And that's an area we expanded to. As we got pushed out of downtown and the Channel District, we went down to the south, down to Apollo Beach area, Waimama, Big Bend. And so this probably doesn't reflect it because this is probably, you know, this information is probably a little bit dated, 6 months or so. But we need to have more infrastructure down the south part of the county. Just want to emphasize that those trucks are going down Big Bend Road, and you're probably going to see more congestion with more residential development down the South County as well. And so just point out that as a lot of this industrial movements have gone to the south, we'll need more truck routes and improvements in the south part of the county as well.
Thank you. And one of the recommendations that you'll see here is those South County areas where the truck routes are very spaced out, looking at doing some sub-area studies going forward to see what we might do about dealing with that cargo. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Wallstone.
Can you tell me if is 674 already established on the truck route? I know you said 672 in this.
Yes, sir. It's an existing truck route.
Can you tell me if County Road 39 is already in the truck route?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Kilton.
I just want to thank you for the study. In Plant City, we've been fortunate to have billions of dollars of investment in warehouse and logistics over the past 5 to 10 years, and all strategically located along 4-lane divided highways close to the interstate, County Line Road, Park Road, those types of areas. But there's going to be even more of that on frontage road. So just happy to know that we're thinking about the redundancies impacting Plant City. 39 is a critical thoroughfare, and I expect that there'll be further development on that portion of Plant City as well. And just improved another property a couple weeks ago in Plant City. So we're continuing to grow, and obviously FDOT is going to be building a huge rest area for the trucks there on County Line and Frontage Road. So very important to the east side of the county and all the warehouse and logistics that we have going on there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, could we have? Okay, Commissioner Owen.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Klug, for a lot of the comments on South County. And you're right, they estimate about 40 to 50% of the growth in the next decade is going to go to South County. So 301 and our roads are really congested as it is right now. So I guess my only comment is to be working with everyone so that we eventually have that Leroy Selman extension into South County. I see you smiling over there, Greg, but I just couldn't resist. So I do think that that's going to be a key element in the next decade for us to really focus on. So that's just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Hurtak.
Thank you. When was the last time this study was done?
The last time the map was updated was 2014, but I believe the ordinance is from 2009. Cameron can correct me if I'm wrong.
So there's two existing things here. There's a 1980s ordinance that really needs to be sort of repealed as a housekeeping measure, but the last update that the Board of County Commissioners had on this was 2005. It's actually adopted by resolution. The enforcement provisions are contained in state statute, so the board doesn't need an ordinance. The sheriff's office can enforce it essentially through the board adoption of the resolution that identifies the roadways. But yeah, at this point, you're coming up on 20 years since it's been updated.
And that was going to be my point. Thank you very much, is that I think this should be something that's done probably a lot more frequently, especially as we're talking about the future of South County. It just probably should be looked at a minimum every 5 years. That's the only comment. I think I appreciate it, but a lot of stuff is definitely out of date and will be out of date within a year or two. So thank you.
I think that's a great recommendation, and 5 years would be a good cycle.
Mayor Ross.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd move approval of the proposed revisions to the truck route plan and to move to accept the report.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposes? That motion is carried. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Gina Torres. Good morning, Gina.
Gina Torres, your Assistant Executive Director. So you may recall that after the MOU on creating a Tampa Bay MPO was signed in October, you held your first special meeting of this board in November and laid out some high-level decision points for further discussion that we would need to start looking at this year. Things like how a regional MPO would be structured, its apportionment, staffing needs, mission, committee representation, even office location was something that we talked about last November. So today's meeting will be more specific and relevant to the topic of apportionment. And we'll be asking for feedback on two specific decision points today. At the December TMA board meeting, we were asked to develop roughly 5 scenarios on how the board could be apportioned. This is a really detailed topic. The way a regional board is apportioned will need to be negotiated among all the stakeholders. And we've never really discussed here at this TPO preferences for what that merged board would look like. So at the upcoming TMA meeting on February 16th, the discussion could go in a lot of different directions. So if we can establish some policy decisions on board size and role of transportation operators, this will help our representatives that go to the TMA when those discussions are happening in February. Okay, the board apportionment will be the biggest challenge that we're going to be facing in this process. We should have no expectations that we're going to solve that issue today. Each decision made here will lead to other smaller decision points over this coming year and maybe even beyond this year. Again, we're seeking clarity on the TPO's position. The TMA board hasn't taken action. So they'll review the scenarios that we and give feedback to us at the TMA meeting. We'll bring that back to this board. So this is something that's going to be an ongoing discussion. Your staff is leading the discussion today, And Pinellas and Pasco County staffs will also be bringing this topic of apportionment to their boards this month. And with each MPO having a policy position, the intention is at the TMA meeting that those preferences are shared, areas of disagreement are recognized and noted. It'll allow for some collaboration and finding solutions, resolving any differences. But if we do reach an impasse, there's still the opportunity that we can use a facilitator to get us past some of those, sticking points. The laws that apply to the MPO board apportionment aren't found in federal law, it's a state law. And even in this session, there was interest in expanding membership, but that didn't move forward. So currently, the law caps MPO voting members at 25 with a minimum of 5 voting members. You can see, you've seen this pie chart before, but you can see that the county population ratios based on the 2020 census have Hillsborough making up 49%, Pinellas 32%, and Pasco 19%. And although members must include elected officials, it's also allowable to add non-elected members to the MPO boards. And DOT must serve as a non-voting advisor. So what's an appropriate board size? And some things to consider is that while MPO boards must have between 5 and 25, again, there's no legal limit to the number of non-voting members or non-voting advisors or advisory committees. But at what point does a board become a little unmanageable logistically? We're presenting 3 options for board size and asking you to rank them from most preferred to least. And the reason we're suggesting a ranking is, and not just choosing like one option, will allow the ability to kind of negotiate with the other MPOs if there's disagreement or we're not sure yet. So option 1 would be a small size board of approximately 5 voting members. So it would certainly be easy to manage. Monthly meetings and briefings, following up on requests, coordinating with your aides, and getting meeting rooms would be simple with a small board. The allocation of voting seats would be easier to figure out with a scenario that would likely be 3 seats for Hillsborough, 2 for Pinellas, 1 for Pasco. A small board of 5 to 7 allows opportunities for more robust participation from advisory committees. The number of committees and size could be discussed later. Some weaknesses of a smaller number of seats is the greater over and under representation based on population. And another threat is if the TPO desires a small board, it only guarantees it will be small now, but as population grows, we'd probably have to expand, we would expand or increase the number of members at that time. Across our 3 counties, this would be the largest MPO in the state, region MPO in the state. And a question to ask is if, 5 to 7 members adequately represents Hillsborough's rural and urban interest, if the interest of South and North Pinellas County or all the different communities that are in Pasco, if their interest would be represented by that number. So also in order to take action with a small board, the entire board would need to be present to reach a quorum. And if you can think of any other strengths or weaknesses, please let us know as this presentation proceeds, just so that our TMA representatives have some more ideas and thoughts when they go to discuss this topic at the TMA. Option 2 is a medium-sized board, which is similar to our current board now, which is a big plus because we know how to organize a board this size. We understand that time it takes to do briefings and prepare meeting agendas and secure meeting rooms. The more seats we get, we get closer to equal distribution of seats based on population, so there'd be less over and under representation. A medium-sized board more thoroughly represents diverse perspectives and continues to allow for advisory committees to participate. A weakness would be that the parties that must approve a merger would have to agree to the allocation of seats. And similar to a smaller size MPO, there'd still be the potential that the board size could change in the future. Last option, option 3, would be a large board of 25 voting members. As we add seats, it gets more complex to delegate, but it could provide more representation from small cities, maybe allowing voting of operators, and even representation from entities that we don't currently have on our board. For instance, we have a mandate to coordinate with environmental agencies and affordable housing or economic development, and we don't currently have seats for those entities on our board. That might be something to consider. But if we are maxed out at 25, we could not increase additional seats without legislation. Again, a weakness is that the parties that must approve the merger would have to agree on the allocation. With 25 board members and possibly non-voting advisory seats, would we even want additional advisory committees, or we just have the required technical and citizens advisory committees? Logistically, holding a meeting with 25 members, aides, the public, it would get a little wieldy. We'd have to make sure there was a meeting room that could accommodate all that. So here's where I'd like to get your feedback, and I guess, you know, we could also have discussion here if you'd like, but what I would do is now bring up the Mentimeter questionnaire and ask you to use your...
Can we talk a little before
absolutely,
we do that? Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about the board size. So we have small, medium, and large as your options. Would you like me to go back to a slide that kind of shows?
Commissioner, would you like to go ahead and make some comments?
So I've been giving a lot of thought to this whole thing, drawing on some years as chair of the MPO. I've sat on both the aviation and port authorities. And I just want to throw out a couple of statements. I will not be insulted if anyone disagrees with me, but I want to just frame a couple of things in this conversation. The first is that I think a small board of 5 people, it ought to be taken off the table immediately. We are way too big of a region to possibly have the diverse interests in this community represented on a board that size. I think on the question of a medium-sized to a large board, whether you would have to go up to the full 25 or not, that's a question that we can work out. But I think on the issue of sort of who comes off the top before we divide it by population, the way that I think of the Port and the Aviation Authority as being purely regional assets that ought to be outside of the population allocation. I think THEA belongs at the table, but I think they should come out of the Hillsborough County allocation. If you had a 25-member board and you had the Aviation Authority and the Port Authority coming off the top and you had 23 seats, you'd have 11 for Hillsborough and 12 for Pinellas. If you gave one of Hillsborough's seats to THEA, you'd now have 10 seats that could be allocated among this group based on the populations and the different interests between the county, the municipalities, and the agencies. So I think that if the smaller the board gets, the more resistance we might encounter from Pinellas and Pasco for having the carve-out for the Port and the Aviation Authority. Not saying it couldn't come down a little bit, but I think if it gets much less, they might start to resist that. I also think it's an excellent, these are regional entities, but at the end of the day, if there's ever a real dispute between the counties, there is then some regional representation that can help to find some kind of solution in the middle. So I just wanted to throw those couple of things out there to start the conversation and see what everybody else has to say.
Well, I agree with everything you just said, Commissioner. That's exactly what I was thinking. Exactly. I wouldn't revise what you said at all. In addition to that, there's something that I've been trying to figure out. I don't quite have it figured out, but I think another important thing to do is to preserve the voice of the smaller cities somehow. And I don't say that just simply from a selfish perspective. There are many cities in Pinellas I'm thinking of in particular that are much smaller than we are. And I don't say that because I don't think our commissioners would be responsive to our needs. I don't feel that way at all. I think they are. However, there's a different perspective at being a mayor of a smaller city that you don't have if you're a county commissioner and you have a much bigger region. And I don't know if that's a small cities council, that there are a few seats reserved on the overall board for maybe one city from each of the 3 counties, from cities of less than X number of population. I don't have all the metrics figured out. And maybe that's too many, I don't know, but I think that needs to be on our list also.
Just respond to that. I think actually that's an argument in favor of the larger board because it makes it easier to accomplish that. I also think if you have 10 seats that are essentially left to Hillsborough County, there's clearly then an adequate, there's a scenario where there's enough room for small city representation. Maybe both of you, but certainly one. I don't know. We'd have to figure that out among ourselves. But if we had 10 seats to divide up, we could work that out, I think.
Councilman?
Yes. I don't fundamentally disagree with what the commissioner stated, except that I think it's asking for 2 bites of the apple. Either they're regional assets or they're not. So the reference coming off the top, I think we need to identify, because I think the other counties, like say Pinellas County, may have some regional assets that they may want to insist on too. And I think that we probably, when we factor this in, we need to take those regional assets and have them come off the top and then do our apportionment after those seats are allocated. I also think when you talk about numbers of serving on multiple boards and multiple organizations over my lifespan, I think 20 is about as manageable as you could possibly get. Once you get over 20, it becomes just totally like very difficult. Like I say, meeting rooms, other logistics, it just becomes very difficult. I think if we could limit this to 20 or below, I think it would be very better for business, better for doing business. I think this is going to be one of the sticking points from the other counties' perspective as well of how we allocate this. But I think we decide on what we want to do as far as the non-elected representation to this board and say that's coming off the top and then do the apportionment after that.
Thank you. Board Member Slater.
Good morning. Thank you. Just a couple of kind of points for context. I certainly agree with Commissioner Cohen. Just adding a couple of points there. One is from an Expressway Authority standpoint, although we are only in Hillsborough County today, our special district authority extends to the surrounding counties if they invited us to come over and solve a challenge those. So we do have a little bit, in my tenure, we've only gotten kind of one question on that over the course of the last 2 years. But second, when it comes to HART and those types of things, like you have HART and PSTA, what I'm trying to figure out is where are the voices coming from? So we've got PSTA over in Pinellas and we've got HART here in Hillsborough. Where's the voice from that regional transit going to come from, that kind of between the 2 jurisdictions, that regional piece? I think there's no question when it comes to Tampa International or Port Tampa Bay, the voice for freight and the voice for air travel are going to come from those 2 entities in the entire region, although there are other players kind of in that conversation, but that's where the voices are going to come from. So I'm inclined to start to think about a larger board at this point, see where the voices are coming from, where they evolve, because I think the board that we have day 1 doesn't necessarily have to be the board in year 2 or year 3. It's just as we start to feel where this region is and where those voices are coming from, how do we make sure that all those voices are heard and all those voices are at the table?
Thank you. Board Member Kluwer.
Yes, I also want to comment on the excellent comments by Commissioner Cohen and others here today about the regional impact of Port Tampa Bay and also the Aviation Authority. Both entities, I think, joined the MPO about 25 years ago, back when the MPO was about 10 members, and it was expanded to add 3, one more county commissioner, and the Aviation Authority and the Port Authority, because they saw that that major modal transportation that was needed and representation on this MPO. And since then, we've added 3 more members. But with that, we do have that very much a regional impact. You saw that last month in the transportation study by DOT, the freight logistics study. It showed the number of freight movements coming from the port and leaving the county. So it's not just inside the county. Even that's the case within Hillsborough County, we should have a voice in the MPO, but we're such a regional impact in the surrounding counties, directly about 19 counties surrounding us that our cargo comes to or fro, And so that's one reason alone to do that. But also is that we're going to continue to have cruise passengers and other types of transportation modes with buses and vans and Uber drivers as Lyfts, et cetera, that we need to have a voice in as they're coming to our port, as our cruise terminals start to expand as well. I also want to echo Mr. Mai's letter. I think you all received a copy of that. He's one of our commissioners on our board. He's very interested in land use and in particular, and he actually lays out very well the economic impact the port has and why the port should continue to be on this merged MPO and having voting membership. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Lapando.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Commissioner Cohen for his observation, having sat on both boards, understanding very well the power of these entities. And just for reference, I mean, we get about the same number of people traveling to the airport from Pinellas as we do from Hillsborough County. And it's followed, those two are followed by Pasco. And the numbers are in the millions of people that need to come to the airport every year. So it's a huge regional asset, and I agree with Commissioner Cohen's approach.
Okay, Commissioner Cohen.
I just wanted to respond to something Councilman Clendenin said. I agree with you that 20 would be a more manageable size. I just don't know, given the different interests that are at play here, whether or not it's not going to be a lot easier to work it out if you have a few more seats to have. I don't think, with all due respect to our neighbors across the bay, I don't really think there are any entities outside of the port and the airport that rise to that level of size and scope as regional assets. In terms of HART and PSTA, my thought is that we really need to see how Pinellas wants to handle it. I think that's something that should be negotiated in the sense of, are we going to include that in our apportion, or are we going to have them as non-voting representatives like FDOT? And I think part of that is going to be how the other county sees it. So, you know, I think I think we ought to go in with certain things that we feel strongly about, and then other things that perhaps we're willing to talk about and not totally committed to one way or the other. And I think the position of the transit agencies is something that we really need to just actually get feedback from the other groups about.
Councilman Clendenin.
Yeah, just to be clear, I absolutely agree that the port and the airport are regional assets and need to have a strong voice on this combined organization. I think that probably, maybe that's where that's that negotiating between the counties, because, you know, what their positions are on some of their organizations, we don't know how deep they're going to dig in. And maybe if we start striving for a lower number, and we, again, off the top and not through not take it out of our apportionment, I think that would be, because we could add, let's say we went to, we shot for 18, and then we said, well, you know what, let's go up to 20 and add these so that our apportionment's not included in that. These are regional assets. I mean, I 100% agree that they're regional assets. I mean, I'll go with the Expressway Authority. I'm in fact curious, so this new toll road that they're putting in Pinellas to connect 275, is that not being governed by y'all?
No, that is an FDOT project, the Gateway up 275.
Okay, very good. But so, you know, I mean, I can see that there'd be wisdom in the future of, you know, adding the Expressway Authority in if it expands to these counties. But again, off the top, do the apportionment. I think you're going to get pushback from the other counties as well as we're negotiating if we try to do something different.
Thank you. Mayor Ross.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I know we have a computerized survey to do, but keep in mind that this is the beginning of this conversation, not the end. And so the representatives of this group on the TMA just need some high-level guidance, so when we go to the TMA, we can throw this out and say, this is the starting point. Certainly during this discussion, Pinellas or the other cities are going to have input past goes. I mean, this isn't the final. I am very comfortable if there's a consensus on this. I would be very comfortable as one of the TMA representatives. I'm not the only one, but I'd be very comfortable starting with the framework outlined here by Commissioner Cohen. And I know we have a survey to do, but I don't know how important it is that we complete that, or so we just put that into a motion. And I don't know if there's anybody who's really objects to that. Now, we may get pushback, this may change. There's the whole Heartline PSTA discussion I'm sure is going to happen. There's the small city discussion that I'd like to explore. You know, there's a lot of things left here, but we're not going to run this to ground today. What we need is a starting point that we can all live with.
Councilwoman Hurtak.
Thank you. And I think that it's great to be talking about it here, but I do not know that the other counties believe that these two things are regional assets that they'd be willing to take off the top. That is not what I've heard at the TMA meetings. So we also have to consider the fact that that's something they're not going to want. So I think that, yes, we should go and talk about what's coming off at the top, but I don't necessarily see that happening from what I've heard at the meetings so far. And I'm going to be another vote for a smaller one, and I strongly believe that it should be electeds only. I strongly believe that for this TPO. I feel already the city does not get enough representation for the issues that affect us. And so I strongly believe that it should be an electeds with these regional assets being on the board but not voting members.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Wassiter.
Director Wong, if we started with only elected officials, and then as the board worked out all of their initial details in the event that they did merge, what would be the process or opportunities timeline for them to expand if they did agree that the NGO should be invited to the table for a vote?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. I imagine, and I may at some point defer to the TPO attorney, but our process for apportioning our board is that we're required to update the seats every 10 years following the decennial census. But anytime in between that 10-year period, we could take a vote to add seats or remove members. I don't believe that there's any trigger mechanism that...
There's no federal requirement that guides that?
I can speak. So, Commissioner, there are some limitations. The way this board most directly does it is through interlocal agreement between all the member bodies. So the TPO has an interlocal with the county, with each city, basically to agree to who's providing what membership. There is a way, it has to be done after each census, that's one, but it is possible to do it outside that box if needed. I can tell you in the mid-teens, not long after I came on board, we added the school board as a member. One of the things you have to do is, through the state and federal regs, is you have to make sure that FDOT and especially USDOT, Federal Highway, have no concerns about the designation change. If it's deemed to be, and I forget the language off the top of my head, but essentially it's a substantial change to board membership, it's a more drawn-out process. With adding the school board as a member, it was deemed not to be a substantial change, and so the process was much easier. It involved taking it to each of the local governing bodies and then also changing the interlocal agreement to add the school board member. So there is a mechanism to do it. It's not something I think it can be done quickly. It takes some time, but there is a way to do it in between the censuses to make designation composition changes to a board.
What's your idea of it takes some time? 6 months, 3 months?
It's the non-substantial change that was made to add a school board member. Off the top of my head, I think that took something like a year, and that was not a significant change. The type of change you're talking about, where if you had only electeds from the counties and then later it was decided to add additional members, that's going to have I would imagine, it's not my call, but I would imagine that's going to be deemed a substantial change, which would be a longer process than that. So, and think about it in this context too. I mean, it's already 2024. Who knows how long it takes to come to something on this? By the time you get to a resolution on this, you may be getting relatively close to the next census anyway, which then triggers the federal requirement to redesignate.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're all arguing semantics at this point. No entity has put on the table what they're hoping to achieve in terms of membership, and I just feel like we continue to talk in circles about this topic. It seems like we're chasing our tails, so hopefully something happens soon.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Clinton.
I'm sorry, couple more thoughts. One, when you're negotiating, you don't negotiate out of your own hide. So it seems silly to go into this and negotiate out of our own hide. Why not go for off the top from our own perspective? Secondly, and kind of where Councilwoman Hurtek was, I think that I can't see the other counties going into this and supporting, if they don't have any other agencies that they're going to put on, supporting non-electeds on. And I don't want to see, and we all know now, the city of Tampa has a great voice in what the future of this is going to be. And I think with watered down representation, I think it would be a poison pill for us. So I think we need to strongly look at this as, let's not negotiate out of our own hide. Let's go into this meeting with it off the top. If they reject that, then we can revisit, but let's take it off the top, because that's what you do in a negotiation.
Thank you. Mayor Kilton, and then Commissioner Camp.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Cohen on this as well. I think for a couple of reasons. The answer is always no if you don't ask. So why wouldn't we come in a position asking for those 2 seats off the top? Just exactly what you were just saying. But I do also believe that the non-electeds should continue to have a voting presence. I think, especially for these 2 agencies, they know the business of transportation and the impact that they have on areas like freight and what's happening with the airport better than anybody else around the table. And I think there's something to be said for a apolitical voice at the table as well, to keep government in check sometimes, right? Because we can sometimes make decisions from a political place that's not the best case scenario, and can be turnover in these seats that happens, somewhat frequently. Whereas these agencies and organizations have the consistency, and they've been there and will continue to be there for a long time. And there's not so many of the non-elected seats that it really completely counterbalances the electeds. I think having a handful, a few, makes sense for all those reasons. They're not taking over the board, but they're having a very strong and significant presence, and especially for those 2 agencies need to be there. So we need to come out strong on this, I think, for this issue, and really push hard for it.
Commissioner Camp, thank you.
I've looked at and thought about this a lot, and I know when we did when we saw what the state MPOs were, TPOs were some months ago, in the entire state of Florida, I think there's like 24, 26 MPOs. By the way, even small counties have their own TPOs, and none of the other counties have merged. But if you look at all of those, the survey done showed that we had like 63% elected officials, and every single other one had over 90% elected officials. Just like to point that out for a baseline, because I think that was the original intention of TPOs when they were formed in the 1980s. But having said, and I do think, obviously 5 or 10 people would not suffice. You have to have something bigger, something more towards 20 or 25. I do think that if we do put the port and the airport on, they should definitely be taken off the top, because this is nothing personal to the CEOs on the board now, but they aren't elected officials. I think that that's significant, and makes a difference whether they change or not, whether what they're representing changes. Elected officials are simply more accountable to the public, and I don't want to see a situation where Hillsborough County has fewer elected officials on the board representing them than other counties. That seems to me grossly unfair when we have 1.5 million people, when Pinellas has 950,000, and I think Pasco has like 550. We should have, a per capita ratio of elected officials. I don't want to forget that we can't have as many people as we want as long as they're non-voting advisors, as FDOT is now. And I don't want to lose the expertise in transportation that we do have with the board and port. I think it is very significant as advice. The expertise and information is there. The voting, I'm less concerned with, and we could grow above the 25 with non-voting advisors if we wanted to. Again, I think it gets unwieldy after 20. I'm just throwing out some things here, but I think if we do have 2, that should definitely be off the top so that we can proportionally have elected officials. I also see that the other organizations, if you look at the 3 different counties, only one, what is it? I don't have the chart in front of me right now. Is it Pasco that has 1, or Pinellas that has 1 non-elected?
So of the 3 MPOs, Pinellas, Pasco, and Hillsborough, we're the only board that has unelected officials on it. PSTA is represented. PSTA is Pinellas' transit agency. They're represented, but they're represented by an elected St. Pete City Council member.
Right.
Pasco doesn't have any unelected members.
Okay, so we're looking at a board that has 5 unelecteds as compared to Pasco and Pinellas, by the way, which have 0 unelecteds. So I think, again, if we want to do the port and the airport, and I'd prefer to just look at it as Councilwoman Hurtak has described. But if we do the port and the airport, I think it should definitely be taken off the top and be supported by all the other groups. And I just think we can have the transit agencies, if we want, in a non-voting advisory capacity, the planning, each of them have their own planning. Pasco also has a transit agency, by the way. And each of them have their own planning agencies. So there's no reason why we should be looking at all of those. We haven't even mentioned that. Or Thea just being here in Hillsborough County, again, I think a non-voting advisor to me makes more sense, and not counting against the 25. So I'm just going to throw out all those thoughts. But I'd like to initially look at an elected board and, see what we can, as matches the other counties, and see what we can do after that in terms of adding non-voting or voting members if the others want to be represented or want to have a regional entity on the board.
Thank you, Commissioner Kemp. Board Member Joseph? Is it, okay, I'm sorry, Secretary Cohen, I didn't know which.
So I think it's a great conversation, a lot of thought put into it. And so I currently serve as a non-voting member of 4 MPO boards as an advisor, with the 3 that are considering the merger, and then with Hernando Citrus. And I can tell you they're all different. And there's also a lot of flexibility in how you can set up an MPO board. Pinellas, for instance, they do have a PSTA seat, but it is filled by a elected board member. They also have rotating seats where, for instance, they have on some of the barrier island cities, they have several cities that are small, and they rotate the seat among the cities every 2 years or however often. So there's opportunities to do things that are a little different than just having to pick a concrete board. There can be flexibility in there. In my discussions with members of the Pasco and Pinellas County MPO boards, they all seem very, very receptive to the regional concept. And I think they've all come to terms with the fact that it has to be, at least in large part, based on population. In other words, in the beginning, I think Pasco felt we should get the same number of seats as Hillsborough. But I think they've come around to understand that if you have twice as much population, you don't get the same number of seats. And there has to be some trust amongst all the members that nobody's going to get. The other thing that I remind all of the MPOs is you can't take the money from one county and spend it in another county. You just can't. Hillsborough couldn't take the money from Pasco and say, we're spending it in Pasco, or in Hillsborough, or vice versa. Pinellas and Pasco couldn't team up and take Hillsborough money and spend it in their counties. There's rules about that. We have to spend the money in those counties. And as we had talked before, hopefully one of the bigger things we can do is to show ourselves as a big region and go after these big federal grants and so forth. But the one thing I'd say on the authorities, personally, I feel that the airport and the port bring a lot of good regional context to the conversation. If you're going to sell it to the other counties, I think the bigger question is, are you going to say that the representation from those two agencies, if those two are ones you pick, are going to be the chief executive of those agencies, or are they going to be an elected board member? I think if I was another county and I said, well, the airport authority representative could be a county commissioner from Hillsborough, I might be more willing to say I don't like that, because that basically just gives them another elected on the board. Whereas if they say, I've got somebody like Joe who understands that Pinellas, Pasco, and Hillsborough all are important to their agency, perhaps that would be easier to sell as an off-the-top ask, as opposed to letting it potentially be two more county commissioners or city council from Hillsborough County, which could make them feel like that would be more worrisome than to say the port and airport chief executive or their designee, who is hopefully going to provide more continuity over time, and probably are looking at it more regionally, not wearing two hats, but wearing one. But I just bring that up as a conversation point.
I think Board Member Klug.
Yes, and like just to echo that, this is going to be a regional board. It's going to consist of 3 counties, and we're going to talk about regional topics. I think it's important that we have, entities, transportation entities that have regional impacts represented on that. And I think the mission of today is to provide guidance and some direction to our TMA members who are going to appear at the February 16th meeting of the TMA, how to vote on this, or perhaps what their position should be. And with that, I'd recommend a board of 25 members with 2 off the top, the Aviation Authority and the Port Authority. That leaves 23 members to be divided up between the 3 counties. I think 13 of those should be from Hillsborough County, and the other 12 from Pasco or Pinellas. They can divide it up. I know that's what we're getting at. We kind of danced around that issue, but I think purpose of today's meeting is really to find some direction for the TMA, and that's how I would propose doing this. Thanks.
Hold on, before we
Good.
go,
May
hold
I-
on.
So I just
Commissioner
want to
Cohen.
say a couple of things. That's similar to what I proposed, except for, I believe, based on the population breakdown, actually, we would get 11 and Pinellas would get 12. Pinellas and Pasco would get 12 and we would get 11, excuse me. Just a couple of comments about some of the points that were made. I think that what Secretary Gwynn said is very well advised about the representation from the port and the airport, and I would go one step further. As a member of the board of those agencies, I do not feel I would be nearly as well equipped as their executive staff to represent their interests on a regional MPO. I am capable of representing the interests that I represent as a county commissioner, or when I was a city council member, representing my constituents. But representing an agency is, and the intricacies of what their interests might be in these matters, I think is very much should be left to the professional staff. So I agree with that point. I would also point out to the question about what the percentage should be of elected officials, or should it be all elected officials, the proposal that I outlined earlier had 22 of the 25 seats going to elected officials. I think if you have a smaller board and you have carve-outs, that could become problematic in terms of the ratios. But I think if you have a 25-person board, having 3 non-elected officials on it is not going to compromise the integrity of the representation across the entire thing. And then finally, just to one point that Councilwoman Hurtak made, I think if you're concerned about the city of Tampa, or any city for that matter, not having representation, the only real answer to that is going to be a big board. Because if we have anything anything that resembles some of the smaller proposals, there just aren't going to be enough seats for any of the cities to have a voice. And you know, the diversity of our community across the 3 counties, I think, demands that we have a lot of voices at the table. And the way to ensure that the city has its seats is, I think, to try to get to the full 25-member board.
Thank you.
By the way, I don't know if Mr. Klug's statement was a motion, but I'll be happy to either second it or make the motion that you know, we sort of at least have a sense of the board on what our collective position is.
I thought his statement was a motion. Okay. Hold on, Councilwoman Hurtak. Mayor Ross.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. I think we're on the right track here, and on the issue of the other counties resisting the port and the airport, they may very well at first, and that's where our position in this negotiation is, to show them how this could benefit them too. This whole process is supposed to be because it's mutually beneficial to everybody. And that means that everybody's got to give up a little bit, but overall, collectively, we gain. That's the whole point in this. And by us telling them what Joe just told us, you know, as many people from Pinellas go through that airport as from Hillsborough. And so showing Pasco and Zephyr Hills and all these other entities how it strengthens your position to have the port and the airport. It doesn't take anything away from you. It's not like Joe's always going to be on Hillsborough or Tampa or these are regional assets that having them on this board and you collaborating with them, even though you're 70 miles away, this is something that has strength. And so maybe at first they might be resistant, but it's our job to have that back and forth with them and hopefully bring them around. And so I agree with what Councilmember Clenendon said. You know, you don't start off negotiating you don't fold before every answer is no if you don't ask, right? So.
Hold on 1 second. Councilwoman Hurtak.
Thank you. And I appreciate the comments from everyone, and I just wanted to respond to one from Commissioner Cohen. The city of Tampa has to approve this already. So I feel like when I'm at the TMA, I'm wearing 2 hats. So I'm saying what you all want to say, but I'm also gathering information for the city. And right now, again, as the members who sit on this board, the 3 of us, we already feel like our representation on this board is not strong enough. So I'm just saying that in looking at a more regional board, how do we make sure that the voice of Tampa is truly heard? Because we are the biggest city. And if we're not already feeling heard on this board, how in the world are we going to feel heard on a larger board?
Thank you for your comment. Commissioner Owen.
Yeah, and I really couldn't agree with those statements anymore, respectfully. Let's keep in mind that 1.1 million people live outside of Tampa. Let's keep in mind, too, that these entities are in Tampa, the Tampa Airport and the Port Tampa Bay. So I think it's very important, I think, that they do have a voice. I've been just trying to sit back and listen as much as I can to this because I think without question that these 2 entities should be on the board. My struggle, Commissioner Cohen, is more so just the amount of people, the size of the board. But kind of listening to everybody's arguments, I do think that probably starting off with a larger board, taking the 2 off the top is a good place to start, Mayor Ross. I agree with that. But I do recognize the concerns with having a larger board. I serve on some of those larger boards, and they can become chaos in a lot of ways too as well. So, I really, I'm going to be supporting it. I'm going to be supporting the motion, while also understanding that I do expect our friends on the other side of the water to probably object to this. So, thank you.
Thank you. And this will be our final one, and we're going to go back to Gina so she can finish her report.
And I just have.
Councilman.
So a question and then another question. Can I address to the secretary, as a non-voting member of this board, do you feel like your contribution or input is restricted because you're a non-voting member?
No, and quite honestly, part of the reason that I'm not, we used to be a voting member of MPO boards, but the Sunshine Law would make it where I couldn't come talk to you about items on the board. And with FDOT, you know, we work with every city, every county, and so it made more sense for us not to be a voting board, a member of the board. But all 4 MPOs have, you know, allowed us to speak and weigh what we say. And then, you know, so I don't feel that, but I think it's because of how much we overlap every agency in, you know, we have projects in every city, county, municipality, and so that's probably the biggest reason.
So, yeah, so I think when we move forward, we need to make sure that this combined board has spots for non-voting members. So we need to make sure that representation is there and it's in the structure that we have spots for non-voting members, the subject matter experts that are participating in the discussions, just not voting. So I think that's important as we structure this. And my next question is, where are we at? Was that a motion from the director? Okay, that's why, so I assume that then you seconded it, so we've got
Yes.
that motion on the floor.
So we have the motion on the floor. Now we're going to go back to Gina so she can finish her report. Gina. And thanks so much for the excellent dialogue.
Obviously, from this discussion, I should have started with decision point number 2. So if you can pull up the slides, and I'm not going to have to go through these because you guys, the board members have already really evaluated the things that I was going to be sharing with you about the role of the transportation operators. And I obviously should have started with this and not the size of the board. Here we talk about our representation. You've already mentioned that we are the only ones with elected officials. You know, are these local or regional? You have already discussed your thoughts on this. It sounds like, you know, the airport and port seem to be getting a lot of support for being regional. We included Thea in that when we were making our presentation. And our 3 options would be, should the transportation operators just have non-voting advisor status? Should the regional transportation operators have voting membership and come off the top? I'm not going to go through all of the reasons why these were positive or negative because you've already discussed that. But or should the regional transportation operators have voting membership and come out of Hillsborough's allocation? These are the simple questions. The more details about who would be advisors and if we have committees, there's other things that would play into this. But just to have these 3 options voted on will help our TMA members or representatives at the board. Those other finer details would definitely play out as the year moves on. I guess we could do the Mentimeter. It's kind of fun. And just to get the whole board's consensus then, you know, it could be through action or we could do it this way where you can see. But the questions would have been advisors, off the top regional entities, or coming out of Hillsborough allocation. Johnny, do you think that we should go through the Mentimeter or should we just follow up on the?
We have a motion on the floor, so we'll
Yeah,
go
let's do
ahead.
the motion. Okay, sounds great.
Okay. Can we do a roll call? Just. Charles, you want to?
Absolutely. Motion is to have a regional MPO consisting of 25 members, with 2 members being off the top. That would be the Aviation Authority and the Port Authority. And so there'd be 23 divided between the 3 counties. I guess of that, 11 would be Hillsborough County, and the other 12 would be divided between Pinellas and Pasco, as they choose.
Okay. We do.
Would that also be specific to Secretary
Okay.
Gwynn's, specific to Secretary Gwynn's suggestion that we clarify that the 2 off the top would be represented by the respective CFOs or their designees?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And
We have a motion.
Should we include in this motion, or in this motion, to include non-voting Should we include in this to include representation for non-voting members? Or at least have the sentiment of that from the board?
I think he stated the airport and the port.
It'd be voting members, but off the top, right?
Yes.
Of the 25, right? Right.
As far as y'all hear that from us.
I think that discussion will come a little
Yeah,
later.
I think the motion's sort of neutral to that.
Right. Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and a motion by Board Member Klug, second by Commissioner Cohen. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposes?
Nay.
How many nays we have? So we can get it for the record. We have three? Commissioner Kemp, Councilwoman Hurtak, and Commissioner Wallster. Did I get it right? Is it three? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gina. Sorry to have you to stand so long, but, okay. Next time, take your seat and during the discussion. Okay, so we're going to move right on to the Executive Director report. Good morning.
Thank you, TPO Board. I would like to read off
Bring
my
it back over
executive.
so we can hear
Like
you.
to read off my executive director's report. In light of the conversation that we had today, I think we identified the policy position of this TPO board to represent to the TMA meeting, which will be held on February 16th at 9:30 a.m. That meeting will be hosted at the airport in the new boardroom of Sky Center 1. It will also be accessible via Zoom link. I'd like to report to you on some legislative updates regarding bills that we're tracking, and I provided an update at last month's regular meeting as well. Senate Bill 1678 would eliminate driver's license and tag fees, which implicates this MPO because they're a source of revenue for transportation projects. There is a House companion on that bill, and it was referred to the Ways and Means Committee. Still waiting on an update related to this bill from our agency lobbyist. Senate Bill 1032 has been debated. You may have heard about this one. It would abolish the Florida Transportation Committee, would abolish the Florida Metropolitan Planning Organization Advisory Council. It's going before the Senate Transportation Committee this morning. In fact, they may have already seen it. A strike-all amendment will be or was offered to delete provisions related to abolishing the Florida Transportation Commission and also allowing FDOT to manage and chair MPOs which receive poor scores on an annual performance review. So the original language of the bill would have required FDOT to devise an objective scoring criteria for all MPOs. And if MPOs fail to meet those scoring criteria, the district secretary could either assume the role or appoint someone to take over administrative control of the MPO at the staff level as well as chair the board. So that provision was an amendment to strike that provision was entered this morning or will be. Finally, HB 7049. The House version of this bill was discussed in the Transportation and Tourism Appropriations Subcommittee. Members were advised to consult with their MPOs and discuss the impacts. So this bill has been debated in the Senate already and in some subcommittees of the House. A little bit late in the game, legislators were advised to consult with the MPOs to discuss implications for planning in their respective areas. I believe that while the directive or suggestion to consult with MPOs would be helpful, I think a proactive approach may be more productive. And so suggesting to this board, maybe if not now, at some point in the future, you could grant or provide direction to myself and my staff about providing proactive fact sheets to legislators to inform them of the implications of any proposed legislation. We're a little bit behind the ball on this one because the Senate bill was introduced and then the House and the subcommittee saw it. And then only after it was debated in subcommittee did folks start to reach out to me and ask for information. And so with your blessing, I think it might be more helpful to provide those fact sheets up front so that legislators speak from an educated position in subcommittees.
Any comments on the fact sheet?
Report.
Commissioner Kemp?
I just have a comment on the TMA meeting. You said, because we've had issues with the airport before and actually with the port in terms of access for the public. And so I'm wondering, you said accessible by Zoom and not by YouTube, because people are used to using YouTube. And what about members of the public? It just doesn't, it seems like we should have all these publicly available with ease. Is Sky Center 1, can you park for free there?
Yeah.
If you want to go, I thought so, okay. But I do think in terms of technology, is Zoom the only?
Well, this is kind of an issue to be resolved among the other MPOs, Pinellas and Pasco as well. We certainly have the capabilities to live stream meetings to YouTube, but in order for the public to be able to participate, it would need to be hosted via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, any number of those types of platforms. We settled on Zoom, or we kind of proposed and then settled on Zoom because A, we have a subscription to that already, and two, I think it's one of the more commonly used platforms, so folks would be a little bit more familiar with it. But in the future, we can explore other options. And although the airport offered to host this meeting, the district secretary has also offered up the FDOT auditorium for us to host those meetings. And as you know, like a number of them have been there over the past year. This one at the airport was an offer that we accepted, but we're not committed to hosting meetings there in the future.
To me, it's really important that they be accessible by YouTube where people are used to it. And, I do get contacted during meetings, like, where is it? How do I get it? And it's a problem.
Okay. Board Member Lopano.
Yeah, I'll be brief. We hosted a three-county commission meeting, and it was widely praised as being a very, very good meeting, but also very accessible to the regions. And so that's why we try to be as proactive as we can, because we are very accessible in terms of our location to all three counties. And Sky Center 1 is at Tampa International Airport. I don't know anybody who doesn't know how to get there to Tampa International Airport. So we're willing to host as long as you're welcome to use our facility.
Any other comments? I want to go back to the fact sheet that Johnny mentioned to give us an update. How do we feel about that? I think it's a good tool during this session that we know what's going on in Tallahassee, the bills that's being supported. I see a lot of nods. Is that a yes? Okay, we can move forward. Okay. Anything else? Anything else from you, Johnny?
No, Sharon, no
Okay.
board, that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Any old business? Any new business? Hearing none. The meeting adjourned at 11:17 a.m. Thank you so much.